All right, so the topic that I'm going to be discussing tonight is hearing, contemplation, and meditation. So it's basically how we approach spiritual practice in the Buddhist tradition. So to give a real overview, before you can meditate, you have to know what you're going to meditate about. Did you hit record on that too? Sorry. Technical stuff. So a lot of people are interested in meditation, and they come to Buddhist centers or Buddhist spiritual organizations because they want to learn to meditate. They hear that meditation is helpful or beneficial. It's going to help alleviate suffering, generate peace of mind, potentially, if they believe in further, more profound spiritual concepts, lead to states of enlightenment or transcendence, that kind of thing. And that's true, according to the Buddhist tradition. I believe that to be true, as a person who's a practitioner and follower of the Buddhist tradition. But before you're able to just jump straight to meditation, you first have to hear some instructions and then gain clarity about those instructions. Then finally put them into practice. There's a process to that. And it can be a quite quick process, but there's also so much more that people can learn outside of just meditation practices, which contextualize the meditation practices, which provide some kind of like ethical kind of framing or guidelines, and all of that provides or creates a more inclusive and complete path, which a lot of more secular approaches to Buddhism leave out all of the context and don't provide necessarily like a support structure, and just take the meditative tradition or meditative techniques out and extract them alone. And according to the Buddhist tradition, that's going to be a much less effective approach at some kind of spiritual development. So, to kind of get into the main topic, this is kind of jargon to say hearing, contemplation, and meditation. These are like a triad of Buddhist terms. There's a lot of like hearing, contemplation, meditation, understanding, experience, realization. There's a lot of these like sets of three qualities that are talked about in the Buddhist tradition. It becomes almost like jargon words. And when we say hearing can mean literally hearing, like I'm speaking, you're hearing me. It also could mean reading a book, so basically learning. Then, after you've heard something, according to the traditional way of talking about this, they say when you hear the words, you've now kind of eliminated the ignorance of not knowing that thing in terms of the terminology. Like you know the way to talk the talk about that topic. But that doesn't mean you've penetrated the inner meaning of that or eliminated all of your doubts about what those words mean. Maybe you've got a new lingo, but you couldn't maybe completely explain that to someone else. Or it's maybe not entirely meaningful to you yet because you haven't clarified your understanding of it. So that's what contemplation means. So they say that through contemplation, you will cut off any of your doubts and misunderstandings about the inner meaning of what those words represent. So when you're reading a book, what that might mean is that you don't just leave it at reading through a book the way, often in the West, especially with like more of just a literature book, you read the book and you get to the last page and you say, I read it, I'm done. But in terms of our approach to spiritual texts or mind training texts, meditation texts, that's not really an approach that's going to get you anywhere, So you want to read that text, and every time you come across some passages, really stop and think about those. And if you come to a block where I don't understand that, seek guidance on those. And that's where the mentorship kind of aspect comes in a lot of spiritual traditions, to have a teacher, to have discussion groups, to have a community of people, like-minded people to talk about those points with, so that you can come to a more clear understanding of what's meant by those words in the text. So that's the process of contemplation. And then third, we have meditation. So, let's say you're reading about impermanence, a quite common topic in the Buddhist tradition. When you're reading that, you may still not fully understand what it's talking about. So you ask some questions to a teacher, you go to a class, you have a discussion group, you have a learning circle, whatever the case may be. It's only once you come to a clear understanding about what that principle of impermanence means that you can then put it into meditation in a way that's really going to be meaningful. One of the biggest reasons is that when you don't have a clear understanding of what you're going to meditate on, when you start meditating, it's a common experience, people start to doubt themselves. Am I doing this right or not? Is this actually the meaning of impermanence or not? Am I going to make progress by doing this because I'm actually questioning if I really understood the topic or not. So, and then another important point with all of this, hearing, contemplation, meditation, is that if you come to a certainty about some more context around your meditation, you can kind of identify where you're at in your practice in terms of your progress. When you come to more clarity about a general kind of structure of the path of practice, what certain practices might lead to, what the supposed results of those practices are, then you can kind of come to a better understanding for yourself of, okay, I'm at this level, I still need to move on to this. That's also part of working with a teacher, but also for yourself. And I'll give one example. I gave that other triad of understanding, experiencing, and realizing. So they say that, understanding is the first level of just understanding a meditation instruction, or understanding the principle of impermanence or selflessness, or whatever the topic may be. Then you put that into practice. You're meditating on impermanence, you're meditating on selflessness, whatever the case may be. You might start having some powerful meditative experiences, like feeling like you've had a direct experience of reality, of selflessness, of emptiness, of impermanence, whatever the case may be. And you may think, oh, I've realized it. I'm done. I've attained some high level. And it's really important to understand the difference between experience and realization. So there's a famous quote that goes, understanding is like a patch that will fall off. If you only understood the words but didn't put them into practice, and also didn't lead that all the way down the chain until you fully transformed yourself with it, it's not really going to help you very much. It's like patching a hole in your clothes and then, eventually not doing anything to maintain that. It's just going to fall back off. You're going to fall back to where you were when you started, basically, is the point. They say meditative experiences are like a mist or like a fog that comes for a while and then dissipates. And then they say that realization is like space. It's unchanging. It's ever present, something like that. So basically, if you have a deeper understanding, or if you've gone through these stages of hearing, contemplation, and meditation, you've understood a greater context in the path, you have not only more confidence in what you're doing, but a better sense of estimating where you're at in your practice, and maybe not get carried away with certain experiences. It's a common thing. I mentor a lot of people through some of our meditation programs, and people will come to me thinking that they've had the most profound realization, that now they're almost enlightened or something like that, but it's really like a passing experience, a passing experience of bliss, of clarity, of selflessness, something like that. And according to this example, what could show you that, and if you've studied more, you'll kind of understand that, is that if that was realization, it would completely transform, that would be your new experience all the time. It wouldn't just be a powerful feeling that overwhelmed you in a meditation session, and then the next day you're left kind of thinking about it. You wouldn't be thinking about it. You would be consistently and continually experiencing that same state. Something like that. So, more or less what I'm talking about tonight, and what I'm going to keep talking about, is more about kind of what and how we approach study and meditation, more than it is about a particular topic. So you might leave this more with a better context about how Buddhists approach practice than you will an actual understanding of a particular subtopic within Buddhist philosophy or meditation, something like that. So I hope that's not boring for you. I hope that's actually relevant or interesting. And one of my reasons for talking about this and for bringing up this topic is because a lot of people in the West are very interested in the techniques of meditation, and kind of let more of the context and philosophy fall by the wayside, and then only really learn the philosophy if it's integrated with a meditation technique. And that's not a problem if your only intention is just to work for yourself, to kind of overcome some of your own sense of difficulty or suffering or depression or something like that. But what studying Dharma along with meditating on Dharma brings you is a couple of things. For one, an ability to communicate that to other people. If you just have the techniques but you've never learned the lingo or more of the context or the philosophy, then it's hard, even if you've gained a deep inner experience, to communicate that to others. Another thing is that there are some people who can just trust the technique entirely, and they have faith in their teacher or in the Buddha or in whatever, and that's good enough for them to fully engage with the technique. But for most people, especially in the West, where we have a largely analytic kind of, for a lot of people, like, we want to know. We want to know why. We want to know, somehow validate that for ourselves, that there is something worthy of being done here. But like through studying more of the philosophy and the context, we can understand the why behind the technique and then gain more confidence, which will help us to engage with the technique more fully. Because it's pretty rare in the West for people, in Asia, in the traditional cultures of Buddhism, India, Tibet, Nepal, all the other places, Southeast Asia, it's quite common to be raised in a culture where you automatically think that like the Buddha is an omniscient being and this Lama in your village is a fully enlightened Buddha, and you're just going to trust whatever they say. That's not going to happen for most people in the West, right? People want to know, like, why should I do this? What are the benefits of that? Could you demonstrate some benefits of that, like in a way that connects to my experience, And so studying the Dharma can like help people kind of bridge that gap into gaining more trust in the techniques, and when you trust the technique more, it's going to be more effective for you than if you're doubting it. Or even if you're not actively doubting it, if you're not fully convinced of the technique or the path. So I'm going to talk about some nitty-gritty details of what Buddhists study in a Buddhist study center, like in an academy of Buddhist learning. And then talk a little bit about a program that I say our sister Sangha, but I'm also fully a part of it, so it's not like a separate thing for me. But there's another organization around here called AWAM, if you've ever been to the Buddha Garden up in Arli. It's the same teachers, same Dharma lineage as Namchak. We just have a separate nonprofit. And so there's a summer studies program. It's called the AWAM Buddhist Institute. And the main topic, or the main text that they study, is this book called The Treasury of Precious Qualities. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's contained in this book, what's studied in a monastery, in the monastery, because like in the monastic studies, they'll study for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of just Buddhist philosophy. And all the way they're doing some meditation on the side and whatever, but they're mostly studying. And, for us, we have a program that is like, it used to be longer, it's now a little bit more abbreviated, but it's like a week per year for 5 years. So that's like way shorter, but it's something that is doable for a lot of Westerners. A lot of us we're not going to take our whole life to go off and study in a monastery, or, many months a year to commit to being away from our jobs or our partners or our children or whatever the case may be, So, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these main topics. So, the main topics that are covered in this book are essentially, actually, let me talk about the monastic studies first, and then how they are kind of contained by what's gone through in the AWAM Buddhist Studies program. So the main topics are something called pramana, which is basically Buddhist logic. So it's not that different if you've ever studied any Western philosophy or computer science about like mathematical proofs. If this, then that, for this reason, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of stuff in Buddhism, whole subjects, like in the monastery we studied it for 2 years, just proofs. And they're trying to, in that system, like prove why things are impermanent, why the self is an illusion, or why there is any aspect of Buddhist philosophy trying to be proved through a logical kind of system. And then another topic that's covered in that, or that same methodology is used across all the other subjects of study. So you kind of learn the methodology first, and then you apply it to everything else. So it is a way, I guess you could say, that the Tibetans and the Indians, like, even though they have this kind of like automatic kind of like faith in the Buddhist path or whatever, still want to be convinced through reasoning, and still like find that to be a more meaningful way than just having faith. So There's a famous quote from one of the lineage teachers in our tradition called Mipam Rinpoche. He said that the difference between hearing something and just believing it versus being able to prove it through your own reasoning and understanding is like the authentic path to enlightenment and just a painting of it or a reflection of it. Like it's so for some people, just having faith, it could work, but for most people, it's not going to work. So anyway, we go through these studies of kind of logic and whatnot. I think for a lot of Western students, it's not as necessary because we already have a more like logical, rational, reasoning kind of mind. I hate to say this of Tibetans, but largely they were uneducated nomadic people, and learning some fundamental kind of logic was going to be a tool that was almost necessary for them to approach all the other philosophical studies of Buddhism, to understand why things are impermanent, why things are selfless, all those kind of things. I think that we can almost jump past that and go straight to the main topic, and it's going to be okay. I say that as a person who studied in a traditional monastic university and studied this topic for 2 years. So it was helpful for me. I'm glad I did it, but I don't think it's super necessary. And it's not even taught very much in the West at all. Very, very rarely, that particular topic. So the next topic is called Abhidharma. And Abhidharma is talking about karma, 12 links of dependent origination, how we experience the world. Like it kind of breaks down all phenomena into existence. Within existent things, everything either has to be a material form or a state of consciousness, and then within material forms there are shapes and colors and all these things. They break down everything into components of experience. And one of the reasons for doing that is that according to Buddhism, nothing exists in and of itself. Everything is existing in an interdependent kind of system, a relational kind of system. And so when you study things in this way, that you see that like everything that exists, everything that you can experience, basically Abhidharma is telling you how and why cause and effect happen, how things come into existence through these interdependent relationships and things like that. So when you study that in detail, you come to a deep understanding of relationality, interdependence, that kind of thing, that then when you go into the teachings about selflessness, emptiness, these kind of topics, which are basically, when we say emptiness, we mean a lack of a independently existing entity, like something that exists in and of itself outside of an interdependent relationship. That when you go into those teachings and say, there is nothing that exists in that way, you say, of course, because I've learned about the interdependent nature of reality through these Abhidharma kind of level of teachings. So all of those topics, more or less, are covered in the first few chapters of this book. So the first chapters of this book are about the suffering existence of samsara, like basically the fact that everything that we see and experience is somehow still in a cycle of an unenlightened state, that there is somehow, we're either manifestly experiencing dissatisfaction, or our sense of happiness or pleasure is actually just an absence of some kind of more obvious suffering, or because what we're experiencing right now is something seemingly happy is changeable, it's not permanent, it's not going to stick with us, that's still an aspect of a sense of dissatisfactoriness, and that's what Buddhists call samsara. So there's a whole section on that, a section on impermanence, a section on how the human experience is so precious, like why this is a precious opportunity for us to even want to engage in these kind of spiritual teachings. So that it's a unique opportunity compared to other states of existence, like being born as an animal, or even within the human realm, being born in a war-torn country or a place that's devoid of opportunity, all those kind of things. There's a lot of contemplations and teachings about that. So basically all of this is kind of setting the stage of conventional reality, like in a conventional, more obvious way, how do we live, how do we experience the world, how does that exist in an interdependent relationship, that kind of thing. And the next topic is called Madhyamaka, the middle way. Those are teachings about emptiness, and that is what Buddhists call like the ultimate nature of reality. And basically that, like I said before, it's not talking about an absence, nothing matters, nothing, it's not like that. It's just that our mind's kind of natural or kind of autopilot way of engaging with everything that our mind experiences is as if it existed in and of itself, as if it existed outside of causation, that For example, if I were to get angry at someone, in that moment of being angry with them, I don't see that the thing that they did that triggered me was caused by their ignorance, their whatever kind of upbringing, whatever kind of immediate circumstance or sadness or whatever they were going through that day. I just see, you're a jerk, and that's real, and I'm like identifying you in this way that is like solidifying all these interdependent components of what you really are into something that seems very solid and real and singular and independently existing. And that's the way I fixate on that in that moment when I'm upset. And not just that, that's the way, according to Buddhism, we interact with everything all the time. And because that's not the way things really exist, that's why we suffer. Because we're kind of solidifying or limiting everything that we experience into this kind of experience of solidity, of singularity, something like that. So Madhyamaka is a topic which you go into kind of all the deep reasonings and meditations on why the individual self, like the I, doesn't truly exist in the way that you normally experience it, and then into other phenomena that you experience, why those don't experience or why those don't exist in that way, and so forth. And also using the same logic of the Pramana tradition. So all of that is covered in this text. Also, in the section on engaged bodhicitta, there's a section about the 6 perfections, and in that there's a section, the perfection of wisdom, and in that section it talks about the middle way philosophy, philosophy of emptiness, selflessness, meditations on selflessness, all that kind of stuff. The next topic is called the perfection of wisdom, and the perfection of wisdom may sound like it's the same thing as the emptiness philosophy, because in the sutras of the Buddha, the what we call sutra means like the actual words of the Buddha. For the most part, there are some different categories of sutra that are sometimes spoken by his students. But anyway, that's another topic. When we talk about the perfection of wisdom sutras, the explicit or like main topic of those is emptiness. So you would think that that's about Madhyamaka. But the class or the category of teachings in a monastery that we call the perfection of wisdom is actually about how emptiness is experienced by an individual. And when you experience it, what kind of afflictive states you overcome at different levels of practice. So they say that the explicit topic of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras is emptiness. The kind of hidden topic is the stages of realization of emptiness. So it's like the Buddha's talking about emptiness, but by way of talking about emptiness, they're also talking about the person who's realizing that, how they're experiencing that. So there's a whole other topic in Buddhist philosophy about that. And essentially what that means, this is another way that if you know that process really well, you can kind of identify where you are in your practice by what you've overcome, something like that. So there's a whole thing, a whole topic about the signs and so forth that are associated with experiencing different levels of practice, what kind of experiences you might have when it's still a kind of conceptual level of working with reality versus a direct experience of reality. Then even after a direct experience of reality, gaining further familiarity with that and kind of what levels of obscuration are removed at different stages of that and so forth. That's all talked about in this book. Also in the section about the qualities of the Buddha and the qualities of the Dharma in the section about refuge, where it's talking about Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So, and then the last topic, there are more side topics, but these are what's called the 5 main topics that's studied in every monastery in the Tibetan tradition. The last one is Vinaya, which means ethical discipline. And so that can cover all the vows of monks and nuns, but also like lay people's vows, what are called the vows of bodhicitta, tantric vows, or tantric, one way to talk about it is vow, another way is kind of trainings. But all of those are talked about in this section, also about engaged bodhicitta on the perfection of ethical discipline. And then in the second volume, there's another volume of this book that's all the tantric teachings. There's a separate section about the ethical discipline aspect of Tantric Buddhism. So anyway, all of this is just to say that basically, other than the logic part, which I don't think is super crucial and is like highly technical, almost headache level technical in the Tibetan tradition, is included in the teachings that are given at the Awam Buddhist Institute at the Buddha Garden every summer. I'm also a part of that program as a translator and kind of organizer. And it's taught by usually by Namchak Khen Rinpoche, who is one of my closest teachers, one of the main teachers of the Namchak Foundation. Another female teacher named Jetsuma, who is an incredible teacher. She did all of the full academic studies, 9 years in a monastic institution, and then after that did 3 consecutive 3-year retreats. Speaks fluent English also, so she teaches in English. I often translate for Namchak Khen Rinpoche. And then we have another nun here who's living here right now, who also completed 9 years of study and did a 3-year retreat, and she's going to be teaching at that this summer too. So anyway, we have like really incredible like top level teachers, translator who, not to toot my own horn, but I also studied this material in a monastery, so I feel confident to translate what they said accurately. And it's one of those things that our teachers really emphasize. Like, we're talking a lot right now within the organization about, we have a lot of students who are wanting to go into some of the deeper levels of Buddhism, like in terms of philosophy, in terms of practice, all those kind of things. And even to the extent that, this is a more traditional thing, and, there's going to be less students that are interested in this, but we're building a 3-year retreat center where people will do retreat, like closed off from the world for 3 consecutive years. And, one of the things that our teachers really think is crucial for people before they would go into a retreat is to do some more intensive study along with the meditation practice, so they have a better kind of context for the things they're going to experience in a deep retreat like that. I think that, there's more to it just than that, but that I'm going to talk a little bit, I guess, about how some of these topics like actually are applicable to our experience on and off a meditation cushion. So coming back to those 5 main topics, the Abhidharma. So, I've given some separate talks about some of these topics, about karma, for example. Karma is something that I think a lot of people have a very abstract understanding. They think it's like a mystical force in the universe or something. Karma's going to get you or something like that. Karma's a bitch, whatever. That kind of like pop culture kind of understanding of karma. And Buddhism has a completely different way of talking about that. That it's a little bit more complicated than this, but it's more like habitual patterns, like that. There's a common saying in Buddhism that if you want to know what you did in your past, look at your present situation. If you want to know what your future is going to look at what you're doing and experiencing and thinking right now. Like, so basically you are conditioning everything that you think and do and continue to do is conditioning how you're going to experience and see the world in the future. So another thing that, this karma connects to the practice of ethical discipline, and even ethical discipline in Buddhism is more about, not about right and wrong at all. It's about what's productive and what's not productive for your spiritual development. What's going to be helpful and harmful for you and other people. And so when you understand the principle of karma, that this is habitual patterning, certain habits, certain kind of attitudes, actions are going to make you more closed off and more distant from an experience of reality. Some kind of actions, intentions, thought patterns are going to make you more open to, more free, more open to experiencing this kind of reality. When you understand the karmic principle, it informs your ethical choices. When you start acting more in accordance with those ethical choices, you find that the practices are actually more successful because you are not shooting yourself in the foot. So Khen Rinpoche sometimes makes this joke. He says, it's a Tibetan humor sometimes doesn't really translate, but he says, sometimes in Tibetan we joke around about people who are not really taking karma seriously, but really try and meditate their way out of every trouble. Say, man, that guy's a good meditator, but man, he sure is an asshole. So Khen Rinpoche's point in saying that is that, like, if you are not actually doing anything practical in the world about changing the way you behave and changing your thoughts and intentions and actions, and you just try and meditate the problems away, you're kind of like taking 2 steps forward with the meditation and 3 steps back with your actions. So that's why, why I said before that there is this kind of disconnect in some secularized spiritual communities of just extracting the meditation techniques, throwing out all the context, and then expecting that just meditation is going to solve your problems. So in the Buddhist tradition, all these other aspects are really going to set the stage for a successful meditation practice, a successful development in terms of what the goals you're trying to reach with spirituality. Like even just with, I'll talk a little bit about two main techniques of kind of fundamental meditation that we teach a lot in the Namchak Foundation are something called calm abiding. The shamatha is the Sanskrit word. A lot of people know that name. Another one is called vipassana, or insight meditation. And through shamatha, you can calm your mind. Basically, essentially, you learn to focus on your breath initially, then on an external object, then sometimes on a visualized object, then get to objectless shamatha. Those kind of stages of development of shamatha are going to get you to be able to calm your mind. But if you're trying to calm your mind and you're not doing anything and you're continuing to constantly be obsessively looking at your phone, looking at the news, getting angry at your friends, all those kind of things, all of that energy you're putting out in the world is going to keep your mind so stirred up that it's going to be fighting you and every time you sit down to try and meditate. On the other side, if you're applying this principle of karma, trying to think about this like ethical discipline in terms of kind of more refraining from certain types of actions, intentionally, like let's say you know that you have a problem with someone and every time you get upset with them, making some really conscious choice before you go in front of them to like bring a special attitude to that relationship, or really try and gain some patience with that, or even maybe distance yourself from the situation if you're not able to. Either way, there's different techniques. It's not like you have to go into every troublesome situation and deal with it right now. Anyway, there's lots of advice for that in different levels of practice. But anyway, let's say you are being more intentional with that. When you are being kind instead of being angry, let's say when you're being angry, after you're angry, you're going to feel grief, you're going to feel paranoia, like, oh man, I upset them, I upset myself. You're going to feel regret. All of that's like heavy. It's making you feel more closed off from the world, from other people. That's like counterproductive to what you're trying to do in meditation. It's making you more closed. Meditation's hopefully making you more calm, and then hopefully ultimately feel more connected, more in tune with reality, something like that. So on the other hand, say you're being kind, you're intentionally reaching out, you're intentionally apologizing when you've done something wrong, you're making those steps in a more way that's more in alignment with this principle of karma, more in alignment with the ethical discipline talked about in Buddhism. When you do something kind, when you speak truthfully, and truthfully that's loaded too, because sometimes there's unkind truths, so there's different levels to that, but just in general, when you're being truthful instead of deceitful, when you're being kind instead of angry and upset or mean, after those actions, I feel, and I think probably a lot of people feel, you feel free and easy after you've been kind. And that sense of free and easy, that's gonna influence your meditation. It's also like the opposite of this closed off feeling of like paranoia and grief and regret. And all of that on an experiential level is more in alignment with the what you're working towards in meditation. So, there are even some teachers. There's a teacher named Robert Thurman. He used to be the chair of the Columbia University Buddhist Studies program. I don't know if he's still associated with Columbia, but he's an independent Buddhist teacher these days. And I've met him a few times. He's a wonderful guy. And he sometimes calls there's a teaching in Buddhism called the 10 virtues and the 10 non-virtues, and he chooses not to use that language. He calls them the 10 spiritually, evolutionarily productive terms or something like that, and the 10 spiritually counterproductive actions or something like that, And I like to think about it in that way too, because that's really what it is. And in Buddhism, like the ethical aspect is not a command from a god or something like that. It's just saying, if you do this, you're going to experience that kind of result. If you do this, you're going to experience that kind of result. It's up to you now. What do you want? So, Buddhist ethics are really in alignment with like secular ethics. I really agree with that. I believe that. And it's just really pragmatic. It's really practical, especially if your goal is this kind of spiritual development. I think also just as far as feeling free and happy and making better relationships in the world, that also is in alignment with that. So another thing that we often talk about in Buddhism, which is kind of an abstract topic sometimes, is this idea of merit and wisdom. So in Buddhism, there's often this like format when we study. We say that there is the ground of reality, or the ground of your understanding, is in the two truths. You should understand the conventional aspects of reality, what I was talking about with like karma, cause and effect, interdependence, that kind of stuff. And then the other side of that is the ultimate reality of selflessness, that nothing truly exists in and of itself, that kind of thing we call ultimate truth. Then the path is called the two accumulations. So there's what we call the accumulation of merit and the accumulation of wisdom. What do we call it in Namchak? Chuki's terms.
I don't remember.
Oh man, we have some other way of talking about it sometimes in some of our translations. Timothy's also on our translation team at Namchak. If you remember, let me know. Anyway, Chuki doesn't like the word accumulations, right?
2 modes of spiritual development, I think.
Something like that. Okay. So anyway, the point is that this idea of merit gets talked about a lot. So that's one of the two accumulations. There's the accumulation of merit, the accumulation of wisdom. And the accumulation of merit is said to be accumulated, or whatever. You're gaining, spiritual momentum or something like that? Something like that? Okay, anyway. Sorry. That's a side point. Basically, the idea is that when you do virtuous things, you are gaining this like accumulation of merit. That sounds really abstract, like you're putting something in a bank. But what I really feel like it means, and experientially, like if you go into the teachings deeper, what it means is you're setting up a circumstance of like a support network in yourself and in the outside world. So like I just was saying, when you're doing good things, when you're being honest, when you are not acting out of anger, when you're acting out of kindness or generosity, whatever, you feel free and easy in yourself. So that's one part of this, like what you get out of being virtuous, gaining merit. You're also setting up a situation where people are more happy with you. You are in a situation where you're being supported. So like there's often like quotes in Buddhist texts, they say like a meritorious person has a lot of support, even has wealth, even has other things, you know? But they still talk about merit as if it's this abstract thing like being saved in a bank. But really, it's kind of like that when you keep doing good things and avoiding harmful things, that's a really loaded term. So anyway, Buddhism, virtuous things, something like that. Even that depends on your intention or some people might think cutting goats' necks and offering them to God is a virtuous thing. There's a lot of that in India. Offerings to Shiva on the top of the mountain, killing 1,000 goats and a river of blood. It's disgusting. Anyway, but they think that's a virtue. So anyway, according to Buddhism, virtue is something that is going to be helpful or create happiness, something like that. So for yourself and others. Anyway, if you are doing that, you are creating a system, a network of kind of comfort and ease in yourself, and also a support network out in the world of like, you have, when you feel more supported, that also gives more confidence, more energy, more free and easy feeling to direct that in a positive direction, like spiritual practice. The other side of that is this like so-called accumulation of wisdom, which basically means that the more you continue kind of getting used to the idea of this more ultimate level of reality, then the more you're going to overcome all of your shit. You're going to overcome these obscurations. You're going to become more in alignment with reality. You're going to feel more free because you're not feeling burdened by not only a sense of overt suffering, but a lot of grasping and fixation towards situations in the world that used to trouble you, ultimately leading to what we call enlightenment. But those two things are working together. The more you go deeper into your experience of reality, they say that it's not a disconnection from ordinary people, but you're going to see conventional reality even more clearly. So you're going to see, like, if someone's coming at me with anger, you're going to see them with compassion and see why they're, you see that as a system. You'll see that person's experience as like a culmination of events and not as a singularly, truly existing jerk, whatever, mean guy. So that helps you to be more ethical. The ethical, like, meritorious stuff, giving generously, being kind, speaking honestly, all of that is making you feel more free and easy and allowing you to be able to go deeper into the experiences of wisdom. So they're like mutually reinforcing things that will lead you ultimately, they say, to Buddhahood. So all of these aspects of study are about these two accumulations, basically how to go deeper into your understanding of conventional reality so that you can refine your conduct, so that you can yeah, essentially it's about refining your conduct and gaining a more conventional understanding of the world, like how things are the way they are, why they are the way they are, why people suffer. You know, because if you just were to not go deep into the understanding of conventional reality, cause and effect, karma, all that stuff, just go deep into selflessness and emptiness, there's a real danger, and this happens to some people, of thinking, oh, nothing matters. Everything's empty. There's no self. So why are you complaining? Why are you pretending to suffer? There's no you to suffer, you know? Like almost like a denial of other people's experience. But if you understand deeply the conventional reality, and then you start gaining experiences of selflessness and emptiness for yourself, then you'll see not only that their experience is still valid because they still believe it's real. And as long as you believe it's real for you. You're going to experience it as real. And real, not real, that's another discussion about emptiness philosophy, so I don't want to get too much into that. But the point is that if you have a more holistic approach to this spiritual path, your experiences of selflessness and of the ultimate truth side should help you feel more in tune and not disconnected. You know, there are stages in people's progression when they go deep into these kind of selflessness and emptiness things where it might feel their experiences in meditation will be more like a void, like nothing is real. But it's kind of a phase that happens in a meditative experience, and then usually, especially if you're working with a teacher, that's why emptiness meditation can be dangerous to be done without a teacher. People can get into kind of states of depression or meaninglessness or something like that. But if you have a good teacher, then there's a bridge there to go back to seeing that because things are empty, that they can express themselves in an interdependent way. It's like there's famous quotes from Nagarjuna that why are things empty? It's because they're interdependent. Why are they interdependent? It's because they're empty. So it's like on a surface level, it seems like this idea of emptiness or selflessness is negating conventional reality, but it's establishing the validity of conventional reality. So that's an experience that people go through. You know, you start meditating deeply on the ultimate truth, selflessness, emptiness, whatever. Experientially, you might have this feeling of nothing matters or nothing's real, but then there is like a bridge back into seeing how that connects back to interdependence, union of the two truths, all this kind of stuff. A little too much information, but it's important to talk about because it's, and that's one of the reasons why Namchak Khen Rinpoche, when he was setting up some of our programming here, he made it to where the Vipassana teachings about emptiness are there's kind of a paywall. Not a paywall, but a commitment wall. Yeah. That like they're not just open to the public. It's in a 2-year program, and there's some like commitment around that. Like, you know, at the end of a first year, you have to decide: do I really want to go deep into the Buddhist path or not? And if I do, then I can come and get these selflessness, emptiness kind of meditation teachings. And if not, it's probably not the best idea because you're maybe not going to have the context to like really explore that deeply or the support to help you do that safely, or not safely, but in the most effective way possible. So we have a program called Walking the Path, which is like a 2-year program of going through all the stages of shamatha and vipassana. Basically the first year of calming and stabilizing the mind, and the second year going into all this insights into the nature of reality, that kind of thing, along with some more philosophical teachings about some of the topics we've been talking about tonight.